In bankruptcy court, my son laughed when the judge said I couldn't even afford a lawyer. I sat in that cold courtroom on a wooden bench that made my hip ache, watching Darius whisper something to his wife Rochelle that made them both smile. Not the kind of smile you want to see from your own child. The kind that says they've won and you've lost everything. Judge Raymond Foster shuffled through papers on his desk, and every rustle of those documents felt like another piece of my life being torn away. Before we continue, please tell us where you're watching from so we know how far our stories reach, and subscribe to the channel to help us grow. The courtroom smelled like old wood and broken dreams. I'd worn my Sunday best, a navy dress my late husband Pierre bought me in Geneva 30 years ago. Darius was in a $5,000 suit. I knew because I'd seen the receipt when I still had access to what I thought were my accounts. "Mrs. Beaumont," Judge Foster said, looking at me over his reading glasses. "It says here you're representing yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor." My voice came out stronger than I felt. Rochelle stood up, all polished and professional in her designer outfit. "Your Honor, if I may, my mother-in-law doesn't quite understand the complexity of her financial situation. Perhaps the court could appoint—" "I understand just fine," I interrupted. The judge raised his eyebrows, but I kept going. "I understand that 6 months ago I had 3 properties, $200,000 in savings, and a pension. Now I'm being told I'm bankrupt." Darius leaned back in his chair like he was watching a movie. That's what hurt most. Not the money. The look on his face. Like I was entertainment. "Mrs. Beaumont," the judge continued, "according to these documents, you signed power of attorney over to your son 2 years ago. Is that correct?" 2 years ago. I remembered that day. Darius had come over with papers, said it was just to help manage things if I got sick, said it was what Pierre would have wanted. I'd signed because he was my son, my only child, and you're supposed to trust your children. I signed it, yes. And you authorized him to make financial decisions on your behalf? The thing was, I had authorized him to pay my bills if I was hospitalized, not to sell my house, not to drain my accounts, not to transfer my late husband's pension into his own name. Your Honor, Rochelle interjected smoothly, my mother-in-law has shown increasing signs of cognitive decline. We have documentation from her doctor stating she's forgotten appointments, repeated herself in conversations, and shown confusion about basic financial matters. That was a lie. Dr. Harrison had written no such thing. I'd asked for my medical records last week, and there was nothing about cognitive decline, just regular checkups, good blood pressure for my age, and a note that I was sharp as ever. But Rochelle had the papers. Somehow she had papers with Dr. Harrison's signature. "This is for your own good, Mama," Darius finally spoke, and he actually used that name, Mama, like he cared. "We're trying to protect you from yourself." I thought about the first time I'd noticed something wrong. It was 3 months ago, when I tried to pay for groceries and my card was declined. The cashier had looked at me with pity while people in line behind me sighed and shifted their weight. I'd called the bank from the parking lot, sitting in my 15-year-old Toyota that used to be my backup car before my Mercedes mysteriously disappeared from my driveway. Adrian Cole, the bank manager, had pulled up my account with a frown. "Mrs. Beaumont, it shows here that you authorized a transfer of $87,000 to a business account 2 weeks ago." "What business account?" "Beaumont Property Holdings, LLC. I'd never heard of Beaumont Property Holdings, but apparently I was listed as a co-owner with Darius. Apparently I'd signed documents transferring my savings to invest in this company. Apparently I'd done a lot of things I had no memory of doing. That's when I'd gone to see Doris Campbell, my neighbor of 23 years. Doris used to be a paralegal before she retired. She'd looked at my papers spread across her kitchen table and said 4 words that changed everything. "You've been defrauded, honey." Now, sitting in this courtroom, I watched Rochelle present more documents to the judge. Bank statements showing I'd willingly liquidated my accounts. Property transfer papers with my signature. letters I'd supposedly written to my pension fund requesting early withdrawal. "Your Honor," Rochelle said, "we're asking the court to declare Mrs. Beaumont incompetent to manage her own affairs and to officially recognize my husband's legal authority over her remaining assets." Remaining assets. That meant they hadn't found everything yet. The judge looked tired. It was 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, and I could tell he wanted to go home. "Mrs. Beaumont, do you have any evidence to counter these claims?" I touched the phone in my purse. Not yet. I couldn't show my hand yet. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a continuance. 1 week. Darius actually laughed out loud. "A continuance? Mama, come on! Let's just get this over with so we can get you the help you need." The help I needed. Like I was a burden. Like I hadn't raised him alone after Pierre died, worked 2 jobs to send him to college, paid for his wedding to this vulture who was now picking my bones clean. I thought about Sunday mornings when Darius was little. How he'd sit in the front pew at Greater Hope Baptist Church, swinging his legs because they didn't reach the floor yet. How he'd hold my hand during the walk home, telling me about Sunday school. How he'd said, "Mama, when I grow up, I'm going to take care of you forever." Forever had lasted until he married Rochelle 3 years ago. She'd seemed nice at first. Brought me flowers, called me Mom, asked about family recipes. Then Pierre's death certificate came in the mail. He'd been gone 18 years, but Swiss government bureaucracy moved slow, and suddenly there were questions about overseas assets and international holdings and, "Have you thought about estate planning?" I'd told them the truth. Pierre had been a junior diplomat at the Swiss consulate in Atlanta. We'd lived modestly. His pension was comfortable, but nothing extravagant. We'd bought property when real estate was cheap. Saved carefully, lived below our means. What I didn't tell them was that Pierre had been careful in other ways too, ways that came from growing up in a country that understood asset protection, ways that came from seeing what happened to families when money brought out the worst in people. Judge Foster sighed. "Mrs. Beaumont, I'm inclined to rule today. You haven't presented any evidence to dispute your son's claims." 1 week, Your Honor, please." Something in my voice must have reached him because he paused. Maybe he saw his own mother sitting there. Maybe he was just a decent man who didn't like the way Darius and Rochelle were smiling. 1 week, he said. "But Mrs. Beaumont, if you can't provide substantive evidence by then, I'll have no choice but to rule in favor of your son's petition." Rochelle started to object, but Darius touched her arm. 1 week is fine, Your Honor. It won't change anything." They thought they'd won. They thought I was a confused old woman with nowhere to turn and nothing left to fight with. They thought I'd sign whatever they put in front of me next. Probably something putting me in a state facility where they'd have complete control. They didn't know about the phone calls I'd been making at 3 a.m. when I couldn't sleep. They didn't know about the documents I'd found in Pierre's safety deposit box, the one he'd told me about on his deathbed, the one I'd finally opened 6 months ago when things started feeling wrong. They didn't know about Ambassador Laurent Duchamp, Pierre's old friend from the consulate, who'd sounded very interested when I called him in Geneva and explained what was happening. They especially didn't know about the bank accounts in Switzerland that Pierre had set up 40 years ago, the ones protected under international law, the ones that couldn't be touched by a simple American power of attorney. After the hearing, I walked out to the parking lot alone. Darius and Rochelle brushed past me without a word, too busy celebrating their victory. I heard Rochelle say, "Once the judge rules, we can sell that dump she's renting and recoup some of the money we've spent on this." That dump was a 2-bedroom apartment I'd moved into after they sold my house. The house Pierre and I had built together, where we'd raised Darius, where every room held 40 years of memories. They'd sold it without telling me, had the papers forged so well that the real estate agent, Tasha Monroe, hadn't even questioned them. I got into my Toyota and just sat there for a minute. My phone buzzed. A text from Doris. "How'd it go, honey?" Before I could answer, another text came through. This one from a number with a Swiss country code. "Everything is in place. Ambassador Duchamp has briefed the team. You're not alone in this. The sender was Agent Francesca Romano from Interpol. We'd been communicating for 2 months now, ever since Ambassador Duchamp had made the connection. Apparently, what Darius and Rochelle were doing to me, it wasn't unique. There was a pattern, a network. Other elderly people, other forged documents, other power of attorney scams. But I was the first one who'd fought back with international resources. I was the first one whose late husband had diplomatic ties that triggered a whole different level of scrutiny. I drove to Greater Hope Baptist, where Friday night Bible study was just letting out. Reverend Elijah Moore saw me coming up the steps, and his face fell. "Sister Celestine, we heard about the court hearing. How are you holding up?" "Still standing, Reverend." Inside, Sister Winifred Hayes was putting away folding chairs. When she saw me, she rushed over for a hug. "Chile, Doris called and told us what happened. That boy of yours should be ashamed." "He should be," I agreed, "but he's not. And that's the problem." We sat in one of the pews, and I told them everything. Well, almost everything. I didn't mention Switzerland yet, or Interpol, or the trap that was being set. I just told them about the bankruptcy, the forged documents, the way Darius had looked at me in that courtroom. "What do you need?" Reverend Moore asked simply. "Prayers," I said. "And maybe some witnesses. If anyone here remembers me signing anything in the last 2 years, any papers Darius brought around, any conversations where he might have slipped up." Sister Winifred's eyes lit up. "Oh, honey, I remember. Last Easter, at the fellowship dinner, Darius was talking to some fancy-looking man in an expensive suit. I overheard him say something about Phase 2, and by summer, we'll have access to everything. I didn't think much of it then, but now—" Reverend Moore pulled out his phone. "I'm calling an emergency deacon meeting. If Darius is doing this to you, we need to know who else he might be targeting. And Sister Celestine, you're not going through this alone. This church has been your family for 40 years. We take care of our own." By the time I left Greater Hope that night, I had 17 people who'd agreed to come to court next week. 17 witnesses to Darius's behavior over the past 2 years. 17 people who'd seen me sharp, coherent, managing my own affairs just fine until Rochelle came into the picture. But more than that, I had something I'd lost sitting in that courtroom. Hope. I drove to the apartment, the dump, and found an eviction notice on my door. Apparently I was 3 months behind on rent. Apparently I'd missed payments despite the fact that rent was supposed to be auto-paid from my checking account. Except I didn't have a checking account anymore. Darius had closed it and opened a new one in his name, using that power of attorney. I called Doris. "Can I sleep on your couch tonight?" "Honey, you can have the guest room for as long as you need." As I packed a small bag in the dark, they'd shut off my electricity too. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Mrs. Beaumont?" A woman's voice, professional. "This is Detective Yolanda Price with the Financial Crimes Unit. We need to talk about your son." My heart started pounding. "What about him?" "How familiar are you with a case from 5 years ago involving a woman named Constance Reed? She was 79 when her grandson drained her accounts using power of attorney. She died in a county facility 6 months later, penniless." "I don't understand." "The attorney who represented her grandson was Rochelle Beaumont, your daughter-in-law. Mrs. Beaumont, you're not her first target. You're just the first one with the resources to fight back." I sat down hard on my bare mattress. The room was spinning. "How many?" I whispered. "That we know of? 11 elderly victims over the past 8 years. But we could never prove Rochelle was directly involved. The power of attorney documents were always technically legal. The signatures always matched. Until now." "What's different now?" "You are. You had the presence of mind to document everything. You had connections we didn't know about. And Mrs. Beaumont? We've been building a case against your daughter-in-law for 3 years. That Swiss connection you made? It opened doors we didn't even know existed. There's an international task force now. We're not just taking down Rochelle and Darius, we're dismantling an entire network. After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. I thought about Constance Reed, dying alone in a facility while her grandson spent her money. I thought about 10 other families destroyed by these people. I thought about how close I'd come to being number 12. But mostly, I thought about next Friday. About walking into that courtroom with more than just hope, with evidence, with witnesses, with the full weight of international law behind me. Darius thought he'd won. He thought the old woman was beaten. He had no idea who Pierre Beaumont had really been. No idea what resources he'd put in place to protect his wife. No idea that every account he thought he'd stolen from me was actually a decoy, set up with Interpol's help to document his crimes. The real money, the real accounts that Pierre had spent 40 years building, those were untouchable. Protected under Swiss banking laws and diplomatic immunity that no American court could pierce. I grabbed my bag and headed to Doris's house. On the way, I made one more call to Geneva. Ambassador Duchamp answered on the first ring. "Celestine, my dear friend's wife, are you ready?" "I'm ready." "Good, because Judge Klaus Weber has cleared his calendar for next Friday. The Swiss court will be in session simultaneously with your American hearing. And Celestine, we have everything, every transaction, every forged document, every victim. Your son made a critical mistake when he targeted the widow of a Swiss diplomat." "What mistake was that?" "He forgot that Switzerland never forgets its own, and Pierre was one of ours. Sleep well tonight, Celestine. Justice is coming." I pulled into Doris's driveway and saw lights on in every window. Through the glass, I could see people, church members, neighbors, friends I'd had for decades. They were all there, waiting for me. Sister Winifred opened the door before I could knock. "We heard about the eviction. Girl, you're home now, and we're going to make sure you stay home." Inside, Reverend Moore was organizing food donations. Doris was on the phone with a lawyer, Geneva Hartwell, who specialized in elder abuse and had agreed to take my case pro bono after hearing the details. Someone had set up a cot in the living room. Someone else was making tea. This was family, not the one I'd given birth to, but the one I'd chosen, the one that chose me back. My phone buzzed one more time that night. Another Swiss number. 15 agents are now assigned to this case. Your son's business accounts have been frozen pending investigation. The IRS has opened an audit. And Mrs. Beaumont? We found 6 more victims. They're all willing to testify. You're going to win this. I looked around Doris's living room at all these faces, all this love, all this support. Then I looked down at my phone, at the evidence building across an ocean, at the trap closing around my son and his wife. 1 week until court. 7 days until Darius learned what it meant to betray someone with nothing left to lose. Except, I did have something left. I had truth. I had justice. And I had Pierre's voice in my head, saying what he always said when things got hard. "Celestine, my love, the righteous may fall 7 times, but they always get back up." I was getting back up. And when I did, Darius and Rochelle were going to fall in ways they never imagined possible. Monday morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from Darius. I was in Doris's guest room, wrapped in a quilt her grandmother had made, and for a moment, I forgot everything that had happened. Then my phone started buzzing again, and reality crashed back in. "Mama, we need to talk." Darius's voice on the voicemail was different now, not laughing, not confident, tense. "Some people came to the house asking questions. Federal people. What did you do?" What did I do? I almost laughed. After everything he'd stolen, everything he'd destroyed, he had the nerve to ask me what I'd done. I didn't call him back. Instead, I got dressed and headed to my first stop of the day, the county courthouse, to meet Geneva Hartwell. Geneva was 52, sharp as a blade, with gray locks and eyes that missed nothing. She'd brought coffee and a briefcase full of documents. We sat in a conference room that smelled like stale air and old coffee, and she spread papers across the table like a general planning a battle. "Celestine, I've been practicing elder law for 23 years, she said. I've never seen a case like this. The international component, the Interpol involvement, the diplomatic protections. This is unprecedented. Can we win?" She looked at me for a long moment. "We can do more than win. We can make sure they never do this to anyone else. But I need you to be completely honest with me. Everything Pierre set up in Switzerland, was it legal?" I pulled out the documents Ambassador Duchamp had sent me. Pierre's will, written in French and English, the trust documents, the diplomatic immunity certifications. The bank statements showing 40 years of legitimate deposits from his consulate salary, carefully invested, never touched. Geneva read through everything twice. Then she smiled. "Oh, they're in trouble, real trouble. Because not only did Darius steal from you, he attempted to steal from protected diplomatic assets. That's not just elder abuse, that's an international incident." We spent 3 hours going through every transaction, every forged signature, every lie. Geneva took notes in a leather journal, occasionally shaking her head or muttering words I won't repeat in polite company. "The power of attorney he used," she finally said. "It's a fake. Oh, it's a good fake. The signature matches, the notary stamp looks legitimate. But the notary who supposedly witnessed it? She died 4 years ago. Rochelle used a dead woman's credentials to notarize your signature." My hands started shaking. That means every transaction was fraud. Every property sale, every account closure, every penny they took, it's all criminal. And Celestine, the IRS is very interested in where all that money went. Because Darius claimed you as a dependent on his taxes while simultaneously transferring your assets into his business accounts. He can't have it both ways. After the meeting, I headed to Greater Hope for the Church Ladies' Quilting Circle. But when I walked into the fellowship hall, it wasn't just the usual 15 women. There were at least 50 people there. Men from the deacon board, young people from the youth ministry, even folks I hadn't seen in years. Sister Winifred stood up when I entered. "Sister Celestine, we've been talking, and we've been remembering." For the next 2 hours, people came forward one by one with stories. Brother Hamilton remembered Darius pressuring him to invest in Beaumont property holdings last year. Sister Jacobs remembered Rochelle asking about elderly members who lived alone and had property. Deacon Wright remembered overhearing Darius on the phone saying, "The old people are the easiest targets. They trust family." Reverend Moore was recording everything on his phone. "This is evidence, Celestine. This is your son showing a pattern of behavior. And honey, I need to tell you something else." He pulled up a news article on his tablet. "Remember Sister Alberta? She passed 2 years ago and her son sold her house within a month?" I remember. People said it was strange how fast it happened. Her son used the same attorney, Rochelle, and Sister Alberta died in a county nursing home, supposedly broke, even though she'd owned her house outright and had a pension from teaching for 35 years. My stomach dropped. How many more? In our congregation alone, 3 that we can confirm. Nationwide, Detective Price says the number could be in the hundreds. That afternoon, Geneva called me with news. "The FBI wants to talk to you. Tomorrow, 9 in the morning. Celestine, they're building a RICO case." What's that? Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. They use it for organized crime, mafia, drug cartels, and apparently elder abuse rings. Your case isn't just about you anymore. It's the linchpin in a federal investigation. I was sitting in Doris's kitchen when the call came. Doris was making her famous pound cake, and the smell reminded me of every church potluck, every Sunday dinner, every normal moment before my life turned into a legal thriller. "I just wanted my son back," I whispered. "I just wanted him to be the boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers." Doris put down her mixing bowl and came to sit next to me. That boy is gone, Celestine. Maybe he was never really there. But you know what you got instead? A whole church full of people who love you. A team of federal agents who want justice. And the courage to fight back when most people would have just laid down and died. That night, I met with Agent Francesca Romano via video call. She was in Geneva, sitting in an office with Ambassador Duchamp and Judge Klaus Weber. Behind them, I could see the Swiss Alps through the window. "Mrs. Beaumont," Agent Romano said, "we need to walk you through what's going to happen Friday." For an hour, they explained the plan. The American court would convene at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. The Swiss court would begin proceedings at 8 p.m. Swiss time, the same moment. Both hearings would be linked via secure video conference. "When Judge Foster asks if you have evidence," Judge Weber said in accented English, "you will show him your phone. On that phone will be a live stream of our proceedings. And Mrs. Beaumont, what we have prepared will change everything." "What about Darius and Rochelle?" Agent Romano's smile was cold. "They'll be served with federal warrants the moment Swiss authorities confirm diplomatic asset interference. They'll be arrested in the courtroom. And Mrs. Beaumont? Every penny they stole is being seized. Every property they bought with your money is being placed in receivership. They won't just lose, they'll lose everything." Wednesday came, and with it, desperation. Darius showed up at Doris's house at 6 a.m, pounding on the door so hard I thought he'd break it. Doris called the police, but I went to the door anyway. Through the glass, I could see my son, my baby boy, and he looked like a stranger. Eyes wild, suit wrinkled, face unshaven. "Mama, please, we need to talk. Just you and me." I opened the door but didn't step outside. Doris stood right behind me with her phone recording. "Say what you need to say. Darius." "This has gone too far. Those federal agents, they don't understand. The Swiss thing, Mama, you're confused. Dad was never a diplomat. He was a translator at the consulate. There's no protected money. There's no international anything. You're remembering wrong." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, I could see how it had worked on other victims. But I'd seen the documents. I'd talked to Ambassador Duchamp. I knew the truth. "Your father was a junior diplomat with full consular status," I said quietly. "I have his credentials. I have his pension documents. I have 40 years of proof." Rochelle's car pulled up behind Darius's. She got out, and she wasn't wearing her lawyer armor anymore. She looked scared. "Celestine, listen to me," she said, walking up fast. "If you go through with Friday's hearing, you're going to destroy this family. Is that what Pierre would have wanted? His son in prison? His grandson growing up without a father?" I hadn't known they had a child. My heart stuttered. "You have a grandson?" 11 months old, Darius said. "His name is Pierre, after Dad. You haven't met him because we were waiting until things settled down. But Mama, he needs his father. Please, let's just forget all this. We'll give back the money. We'll tear up the power of attorney. Just don't let this go to federal court." For a moment, just a moment, I wavered. A grandson. A baby named after Pierre. The possibility of family again. Then I remembered Constance Reed, Sister Alberta, the 11 other victims Detective Price had told me about, the hundreds more Agent Romano suspected. All the other grandmothers who'd been destroyed by this same script, this same manipulation. "Where's my Mercedes?" I asked. Darius blinked. "What?" "My car, the Mercedes Pierre bought me for our 30th anniversary, the one that disappeared from my driveway 8 months ago. Where is it?" He exchanged a look with Rochelle. "We sold it. You weren't driving anymore, and I drove it to church every Sunday. I drove it to the grocery store twice a week. I was driving it the day before it vanished." "Mama, you're confused. Where is the $37,000 from selling my car?" Silence. Where is the $82,000 from selling my house? More silence. Where is the $115,000 from my savings accounts? The $53,000 from Pierre's pension? The $48,000 from selling my mother's jewelry? Where is it, Darius? Invested, he said weakly. In the business. What business? Beaumont Property Holdings? The company that doesn't own any property? That has no employees, no office, no legitimate operations? The one that's just a shell to launder stolen money from elderly victims? Rochelle's face went white. How do you know about... She stopped, but it was too late. About what, Rochelle? About the other victims? About the pattern? About the network of lawyers and accountants and crooked notaries you've been using for 8 years? Darius grabbed my arm. Not hard enough to hurt, but firmly enough to scare. Mama, you need to listen. The police car came around the corner with lights flashing. Officer Bernard Walsh got out, one hand on his weapon. Sir, step away from the lady. Darius let go like I'd burned him. This is family business, officer. Assault is not family business. Ma'am, do you want to press charges? I looked at my son, really looked at him, and I realized I was looking at a stranger who wore my son's face. The real Darius, the little boy who'd held my hand, who'd said he'd take care of me forever. He'd died somewhere along the way. Maybe when he married Rochelle. Maybe before that. Maybe he'd never existed at all, and I'd just been too in love with being a mother to see what he really was. Yes, I said. I want to press charges. Thursday afternoon, Geneva called with the final piece of the puzzle. Celestine, sit down for this. The FBI traced the money, all of it. Darius and Rochelle didn't just steal from you and the other victims. They were moving money offshore, but not to keep it. They were investing it. Investing in what? Cryptocurrency, high-risk ventures. And Celestine? They lost almost all of it. Your money, the other victims' money, it's gone. They're $3 million in debt. That's why they were so desperate to get to your Swiss accounts. They're drowning, and they thought you were their life raft. I thought about that baby. Little Pierre, 11 months old, who'd grow up knowing his parents were in prison for destroying lives, who'd carry that shame forever. But then I thought about the other babies, the ones who'd watched their grandparents deteriorate in cheap nursing homes, the ones who'd been told grandma just got confused and gave away all her money, the ones who'd lost their inheritance to a sophisticated fraud ring. Good, I said. Let them drown. Friday morning arrived cold and clear. I put on my best dress, the one Pierre had bought me in Geneva, the one I'd worn to court that first day. Geneva picked me up at 7, and we went through the evidence one last time. At 1:30, we arrived at the courthouse. The parking lot was full. News vans lined the street. Apparently, word had gotten out about the international component, and reporters loved a good story. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Doris and the church members filled 3 rows. Detective Price sat behind Geneva. Federal prosecutors I'd never met had flown in from Washington. And in the back, trying to look inconspicuous, I recognized Agent Romano, even though we'd only met via video. Darius and Rochelle sat at their table, and they'd brought reinforcements. 3 expensive lawyers in designer suits. They still thought they could win this. Judge Foster entered at exactly 2 o'clock. Let's begin. Mrs. Beaumont, you requested this continuance to present new evidence. I hope you have something substantial. I pulled out my phone. Geneva stood up. Your Honor, Mrs. Beaumont would like to show the court a photograph of her late husband. Darius actually laughed. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. A photo isn't evidence of anything. Actually, Geneva said, it's not a photo, it's a live stream. To a courtroom in Geneva, Switzerland, where proceedings are beginning right now regarding diplomatic assets and international fraud. She connected my phone to the courtroom's display system. The big screen flickered, and suddenly we were looking at Judge Klaus Weber in his Swiss courtroom, surrounded by officials and documents. Good evening, Judge Weber said in English. I am Judge Klaus Weber of the Swiss Federal Court. We are here regarding case number CH 2025-0478, the matter of the estate of Pierre Alexander Beaumont and criminal charges related to attempted diplomatic asset theft. Darius stood up so fast his chair fell over. What is this? This, Geneva said calmly, is what happens when you target the widow of a Swiss diplomat. For the next hour, Judge Weber walked through everything. Pierre's diplomatic status, the protected accounts, the 40 years of legitimate documented wealth accumulation, and then the attempts to access those accounts using forged power of attorney documents. Under Swiss law and international treaty, Judge Weber explained, these accounts are protected with diplomatic immunity. Any attempt to access them through fraud is not just theft, it is an international crime. On the Swiss court screen behind Judge Weber, they displayed bank statements. Not the accounts Darius had drained, those had been decoys, set up specifically to catch him. The real accounts showed balances that made everyone in the American courtroom gasp. Pierre had been careful. Pierre had been brilliant. And Pierre had made sure that no matter what happened, I'd be protected. Rochelle was on her feet. Your Honor, We didn't know about Swiss accounts. Our power of attorney was legitimate. Mrs. Beaumont signed it willingly. The power of attorney, Geneva said, was notarized by Clara Henderson, who died 4 years before the document was supposedly signed. We have Ms. Henderson's death certificate and medical records showing she was in hospice care during the time the notarization allegedly occurred. Judge Foster looked at Rochelle like she was something he'd scraped off his shoe. Counselor, are you telling me you notarized a legal document using a deceased notary's credentials? That must be a mistake. There's no mistake, Detective Price stood up. Your Honor, we have 14 other documents notarized by Clara Henderson after her death, all of them related to elder abuse cases, all of them connected to Rochelle Beaumont's practice. The federal prosecutor stood next. Your Honor, we'd like to request an immediate recess to place both defendants under arrest. We have warrants for wire fraud, elder abuse, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit international fraud. Darius looked at me, really looked at me. And I saw the moment he understood. This wasn't going away. This wasn't something Rochelle could smooth over with her legal tricks. This was the end. Mama, he said, and his voice broke. Mama, please. I stood up, holding my phone, holding the evidence of his destruction, holding the proof that I'd won. You're not my son anymore, I said quietly. My son loved me. My son would never have done this. I don't know who you are. The bailiffs moved in. Rochelle tried to run, actually tried to bolt for the door, but federal agents were waiting. They put handcuffs on both of them, reading rights in voices that echoed through the courtroom. Judge Foster banged his gavel. This court finds that all actions taken under the disputed power of attorney are void. All assets seized from Mrs. Celestine Beaumont are to be returned immediately. And furthermore, I'm referring this case to the State Bar Association for disciplinary proceedings against Mrs. Rochelle Beaumont. Geneva leaned over and whispered, We won. But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like mourning. Because somewhere in the chaos of arrests and legal proceedings and justice finally being served, I'd lost my son. The real one. The one I'd always hoped existed underneath all this greed and cruelty. He was gone. Maybe he'd been gone for years. Maybe forever. As they led Darius out in handcuffs, he looked back one more time. The baby, he said. Mama, what about Pierre? I thought about that grandson I'd never met. That 11-month-old who'd grow up without his father because his father chose greed over family. I'll take care of him, I heard myself say, just like I took care of you. And in that moment, I saw something flicker in Darius's eyes. Regret, maybe. Or just fear. I'd never know which. The courtroom erupted in applause as Darius and Rochelle were led away. Church members hugged me. Geneva shook my hand. Detective Price promised to keep me updated on the federal case, but all I could think about was a baby named Pierre who'd never know his grandmother could have prevented all this if she'd just stayed quiet and let herself be destroyed. I walked out into the cold afternoon air, and my phone buzzed. A text from Ambassador Duchamp. Justice is served. Pierre would be proud. The Swiss accounts are now accessible to you. I've sent the transfer instructions. Celestine, you did what had to be done. Doris drove me home, to her home, which was my home now. On the way, we passed my old house, the one Darius had sold, the one where I'd raised him. There was a for sale sign in the yard. The family who'd bought it from Darius was being evicted as part of the asset seizure. More innocent victims of my son's greed. Do you want to buy it back? Doris asked. I thought about it. Thought about all those memories, all those years, all those moments of believing I had a family that loved me. No, I said finally. That life is over. Time to build a new one. But first, I had to meet my grandson, the innocent baby caught in this disaster, the child who'd need someone to explain someday that his father made terrible choices, but that didn't mean he wasn't loved. I called the number Darius had shouted as they took him away. A woman answered, the nanny probably. This is Celestine Beaumont, I said. I'm Pierre's grandmother. I'd like to meet my grandson. The nanny brought little Pierre to Doris's house on Saturday morning, and my heart broke all over again. He had Darius's eyes, Pierre's nose, my smile somehow, even at 11 months old. He reached for me immediately, tiny hands grabbing at my necklace, and I held my grandson for the first time while his parents sat in federal custody waiting for arraignment. The nanny, a young woman named Shanice, looked exhausted. Mrs. Beaumont, I haven't been paid in 3 months. I stayed because of the baby, but I can't. I have my own bills. How much do they owe you? $8,200. I thought about the Swiss accounts. About the $500 million Pierre had carefully protected. About how I could write a check right now and never notice the money was gone. You'll have it by Monday, I said. And Shanice, would you be willing to stay on, as his full-time nanny, at triple what they were paying you? She started crying. Yes. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Little Pierre fell asleep in my arms, and I sat there in Doris's rocking chair thinking about how life circles back on itself. 43 years ago, I'd held Darius like this, fed him, changed him, loved him with everything I had. Now I'd do it all over again for his son. Because that's what family does. Real family. Not the kind that steals and lies and destroys. The kind that shows up when everything falls apart. Monday morning came with a phone call from Geneva. The arraignment is today at 10. Celestine, are you sure you want to be there? I looked at little Pierre sleeping in the porta-crib Doris had borrowed from the church nursery. I need to be there. For him, so someday I can tell him I saw his father face justice. The federal courthouse was different from Judge Foster's courtroom. Bigger, colder, more imposing. Geneva met me on the steps with news. The federal prosecutor wants to talk to you before the hearing. They're offering Darius and Rochelle a plea deal. What kind of deal? 20 years for Darius, 25 for Rochelle, in exchange for testimony against the wider network. Celestine, they've identified 47 lawyers, 12 accountants, and 63 notaries involved in this operation. It's massive. Your case broke it wide open, Tay. But they need Darius and Rochelle to flip on the others. Inside, federal prosecutor Leonard Hayes sat me down in a conference room. He was 60-something, gray-haired, with eyes that had seen too much human cruelty. Mrs. Beaumont, your son and daughter-in-law destroyed at least 73 lives that we can document. They stole approximately $18 million. Most of it's gone, Bad investments, luxury purchases, gambling. But if they cooperate, we can take down an organization that's been operating for 15 years across 23 states. And if they don't cooperate? Trial. They'll get life sentences probably with the charges we're bringing. But the others in the network will scatter. We might get some, but not all. Mrs. Beaumont, I need to know, can you live with them getting 20 years instead of life if it means saving hundreds of other potential victims? I thought about Constance Reed, Sister Alberta, the 73 documented victims, the hundreds more who might never get justice. What about restitution? What about the people they destroyed? Every penny we can recover goes to victims. Your Swiss accounts are protected. They can't touch those. But everything Darius and Rochelle owned, everything they bought with stolen money, it all gets liquidated and distributed. And my grandson? Hayes's expression softened. He's innocent in all this. Whatever happens to his parents, he deserves a life. You're his legal guardian now? I'm working on it. Good. Because, Mrs. Beaumont, that child needs someone who knows the difference between right and wrong. Someone who won't let him grow up thinking what his parents did was acceptable. The arraignment started at 10:05. They brought Darius and Rochelle in wearing orange jumpsuits and chains. Rochelle looked like she'd aged 10 years in 3 days. Darius just looked empty. The charges took 12 minutes to read. Wire fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, forgery, identity theft, money laundering, obstruction of justice. On and on until the words blurred together into a litany of destruction. How do the defendants plead? The judge asked. Their lawyer stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. So they were going to fight. Even with all the evidence, all the witnesses, all the international documentation, they were going to make this go to trial. Geneva leaned over. They think they can win. Rochelle's been a lawyer for 15 years. She knows how to manipulate a jury. They're gambling that your age will work against you, that they can paint you as confused, manipulated by foreign agents, that the Swiss accounts are somehow suspicious. Can they win? Not a chance. But they can drag this out for months, maybe years. After the arraignment, I went to Greater Hope for the emergency meeting Reverend Moore had called. The fellowship hall was packed, not just our congregation, but people from all over Atlanta. Elderly folks who'd heard about my case, family members of victims, advocates and social workers and lawyers who specialized in elder abuse. Sister Winifred stood at the front. We're here because what happened to Sister Celestine happens every day. Right now, at this very moment, somewhere in this country, an elderly person is being robbed by their own family. And we're going to stop it. For 3 hours, we organized, created a phone tree for elderly members to check on each other, established a legal fund to help victims who couldn't afford Geneva's rates, set up educational workshops about power of attorney, financial abuse, warning signs. Reverend Moore pulled me aside. Celestine, we want to name it after you, the Celestine Beaumont Elder Protection Fund. Name it after Pierre, I said. He's the one who made sure I could fight back. The Pierre Beaumont Foundation for Elder Justice. That evening, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mrs. Beaumont? A woman's voice shaking. My name is Patricia Chen. My daughter is doing to me what your son did to you. I saw you on the news. I need help. I took her information, called Geneva. By midnight, we had Patricia in a safe house with legal representation and a plan to protect her assets. She was the first. Over the next week, 63 more people called. 63 elderly victims reaching out because they'd seen that you could fight back. That you didn't have to just accept abuse because it came from family. The trial date was set for 6 months out. In the meantime, life developed a new rhythm. Little Pierre learned to walk holding my finger. Shanice became less like an employee and more like family. Doris's guest room became my permanent home, and we settled into a comfortable routine of shared meals and long talks on the porch. I used some of the Swiss money to buy back my old house. not to live in, but to turn into a resource center for elder abuse victims. The Celestine Beaumont Center opened 3 months after the arraignment, staffed with lawyers, social workers, and counselors. Detective Price called regularly with updates. They'd arrested 32 people in the network so far, recovered $4 million, identified 215 victims, but Darius and Rochelle still wouldn't talk. They sat in jail awaiting trial, betting everything on convincing a jury that the confused old woman had been manipulated by foreign agents into false accusations against her loving son. Then, in month 4, everything changed. Geneva called at 7 in the morning. "Turn on the news, Channel 5. I did. And there was Rochelle's face on the screen with the headline, "Prominent attorney accused of elder abuse linked to international crime syndicate." The reporter explained how Interpol had traced connections between Rochelle's operation and similar schemes in 6 countries. How the methods were identical: target elderly widows and widowers, forge power of attorney documents, use shell companies to launder money, recruit corrupt professionals to legitimize the fraud. Federal prosecutors say this is the largest elder fraud network ever uncovered in United States history, the reporter continued. And it all started when one 74-year-old woman refused to be a victim. My phone exploded. News outlets wanting interviews, advocacy groups wanting me to speak, government officials wanting to discuss policy changes. But the call that mattered came at 2 in the afternoon. Leonard Hayes. "They want to talk," he said. "Darius called his lawyer this morning. He's ready to cooperate. Rochelle is fighting it, but without Darius backing her up, she's done." What changed his mind? You did. He saw the news coverage, saw what you built with the foundation, saw you taking care of his son. I think, and this is just speculation, I think he finally realized what he destroyed. The meeting happened in a secure room at the federal building. Darius sat across from me for the first time since the arraignment. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. "Mama," he said, and his voice cracked. "I'm sorry." I wanted to believe him, wanted to see my son again instead of this stranger who'd stolen my life. But I'd learned something in these months. Sorry doesn't undo damage. It's just a word unless it comes with changed behavior. "Tell me about Pierre," I said instead. "Your son. My grandson. The baby you brought into this world and then abandoned to go to prison." Darius put his head in his hands. "I was going to use your money to give him everything. The best schools, the best life. I told myself it was for him. By destroying his grandmother? By stealing his inheritance? By teaching him that family means nothing when there's money involved? I know, Mama. I was wrong. About all of it. Rochelle, she got in my head. Made me think you were getting old, that you'd waste the money, that we deserved it more. And I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Tell the prosecutors everything," I said. "Every name, every scheme, every victim. You can't undo what you did, Darius, but you can stop it from happening to someone else's mother." He looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. "Will you bring Pierre to see me before I go away?" I thought about it, about whether a baby should see his father in prison, about what that might teach him about consequences or just about pain. "Once," I said. "I'll bring him once. And then you're going to spend the next 20 years becoming someone worthy of being his father. Someone who understands that family is sacred, that you don't destroy the people who love you just because you can." The trial never happened. 2 weeks later, Darius and Rochelle both pled guilty in exchange for cooperation. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a month out. In that month, their testimony led to 83 more arrests, federal raids in 12 states, the collapse of the entire network. The victims' fund grew to $7 million. Not enough to cover everything that was stolen, but something. A start. And I got a call from the Swiss embassy. Ambassador Duchamp had passed away quietly in his sleep, but not before arranging one final gift. The diplomatic immunity on Pierre's accounts could be extended to cover the Foundation's work. Every penny I spent helping other victims would be tax-exempt, protected, untouchable. The sentencing hearing filled the same courtroom where this all began, but this time, I wasn't alone. Doris sat beside me, Geneva on my other side. Behind us, 73 victims whose cases had been part of the federal prosecution. And in the back, holding little Pierre, Shanice watched with tears in her eyes. The judge, a stern woman named Victoria Santos, read through the pre-sentencing report. Then she looked at Darius and Rochelle. "In my 30 years on the bench," she said, "I have never seen such a comprehensive betrayal of trust. You didn't just steal money. You stole dignity, security, peace of mind. You took the people who should have been able to trust you most, and you destroyed them." Rochelle started to cry. Darius just stared straight ahead. "However," Judge Santos continued, "your cooperation has prevented immeasurable future harm. The network you helped dismantle would have continued destroying lives for years, perhaps decades. That cooperation is the only reason you're not receiving life sentences." She paused, looking directly at Darius. "Your mother is in this courtroom. She's holding your son, the grandson she's raising because you made choices that landed you here. Do you have anything to say to her?" Darius turned to look at me, at little Pierre, who was playing with Shanice's hair, oblivious to the weight of this moment. "Mama," he said, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve your help with Pierre. I don't deserve anything but your hatred. But I hope someday, when my son asks about me, you'll tell him I did one thing right. I told the truth. I helped stop others from hurting people the way I hurt you." Judge Santos banged her gavel. "Darius Beaumont, I sentence you to 20 years in federal prison. Rochelle Beaumont, I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison. You will both be required to continue cooperation with ongoing investigations. Any assets you retain after victim restitution will be forfeited to the Federal Victims Fund." As they led Darius away, he looked back one more time. I raised my hand. Not a wave, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. We'd see each other again when Pierre was old enough to understand, when I could take him to visit and explain that his father made terrible choices but was trying to make amends. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I gave one interview, short and direct. "My name is Celestine Beaumont. I'm 74 years old. My son tried to destroy me, and I fought back. If you're experiencing elder abuse, if someone is using power of attorney to steal from you, if family is treating you like you're disposable, you are not alone. Call the Foundation. We will help you. Because every elderly person deserves dignity, security, and justice." That night, Doris made her famous pound cake, and we sat on the porch watching little Pierre chase fireflies in the yard. He was 15 months old now, saying Nana when he wanted me, laughing at everything, completely innocent. "You did good, honey," Doris said. "Pierre would be proud." I thought about my husband, about how he'd spent 40 years carefully protecting me, knowing somehow that I might need those resources someday, about how his love had reached across time and death to save me. "I did what I had to do," I said, "what any mother would do." "Any mother would have laid down and let them win. You fought back. You saved yourself and 73 other people. Don't minimize that." My phone buzzed. Another victim calling the hotline, another elderly person ready to fight back instead of accepting abuse. I answered. "This is Celestine. Tell me what's happening and we'll figure this out together." Because that's what the Foundation was, proof that you're never too old to fight back, never too alone to stand up, never too afraid to demand justice. 3 months later, I stood in front of 500 people at the Foundation's first annual fundraiser. Little Pierre was with Shanice in the nursery. Doris was at the table right up front. Geneva sat with Detective Price and Agent Romano, who'd flown in from Geneva for the event. "My son stole from me," I told the crowd. He forged documents, drained my accounts, tried to have me declared incompetent. He did everything in his power to destroy me, and he almost succeeded. I paused, looking around at all these faces, survivors, advocates, people who'd decided that elder abuse was unacceptable. But here's what he didn't count on. I had a husband who loved me enough to protect me even after death. I had a church family who refused to let me fall. I had resources and connections that most victims don't have, and that's not fair. That's why this foundation exists, so that every elderly person has what I had: protection, representation, a fighting chance. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Through my tears, I saw Reverend Moore beaming with pride, Sister Winifred dabbing her eyes, the 73 victims standing and clapping and crying because they'd survived too. After the event, I went home to Doris's house, our house now. We'd made it official. 2 elderly women living together, raising a toddler, running a foundation that had helped 412 people in its first 6 months. Little Pierre was asleep in his crib, thumb in his mouth, completely peaceful. I stood there watching him breathe, thinking about the future. He'd grow up knowing his grandmother fought back, knowing his father faced consequences, knowing that justice, however delayed, however painful, was always worth pursuing. My phone lit up with a message from the Swiss embassy. The foundation's international status had been approved. We could now help victims worldwide. I sat down to write thank you notes to the fundraiser donors and realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Darius, not at Rochelle, not at the system that had almost failed me. I was just tired and grateful. And determined to spend whatever years I had left making sure no other grandmother had to fight this battle alone. Little Pierre cried out in his sleep, and I went to him, picked him up, rocked him back to sleep while humming the same lullaby I'd sung to his father 43 years ago. "Your daddy made mistakes," I whispered. "Big ones. But you don't have to. You're going to grow up knowing what real love looks like, what real family means, and someday, when you're old enough to understand, I'll tell you the whole story, the good and the bad, because that's what truth is, all of it, not just the pretty parts." He settled back to sleep, and I put him down gently. Tomorrow would bring more victims calling for help, more legal battles, more testimony and more trials as the network continued to collapse. But tonight, I was just Nana. Just a 74-year-old woman who'd survived betrayal and come out stronger, who'd turned pain into purpose, who'd refused to let evil win. I thought about all the rage points I'd experienced over these months, the disrespect, the theft, the betrayal, the manipulation. Each one had been a choice: lie down or stand up, give in or fight back. I'd chosen to fight, and I'd won, not just for me, but for everyone who came after. That was justice, real, lasting, meaningful justice. And it had been worth every moment. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.